Hello, I'm Joyce Barrett, and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Webinars are brought to you through the generosity of Heritage Ohio supporters. We invite you to join our community by visiting our website at heritageohio.org. Heritage Ohio's mission is to help people save the places that matter, build community, live better. Today, we will have a presentation on preserving the built stock, how the city of Milwaukee has invested in its housing stock. The presentation has been approved for AIA HSW credits. The learning objectives are going to be posted in the chat box in just a moment. If you would like these credits, please fill out the form that I'll be posting in the chat box. We will also be having a book giveaway. Larry recommended Evicted by Matthew Desmond. I will be posting the contest link in the chat box in a few moments. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. If you have a question, please type it into the question box at any time. Most issues with webinar software will be solved if you close the program and restart it with the link that was sent to you. Later today, we will send you a link to the recording, and Mr. Kilmer's presentation is in the handout box on the right-hand side of your panel, and we also have a couple of other brochures he's shared. Our presenter today is Larry Kilmer. Larry has been working in the affordable housing for more than 10 years, focusing primarily on creating and sustaining homeownership. Prior to his current position as the program director for the City of Milwaukee's Neighborhood Improvement Development Corporation, he was the housing rehabilitation manager for the Department of City Development. Larry is an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Urban Planning at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. He holds a master's degree in urban planning, as well as both master's and bachelor's degrees in architecture. He is currently enrolled in the Urban Studies doctoral program at UW-Milwaukee. Larry, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you so much, Joyce. First, I just wanted to welcome everybody and thank Joyce and her team at Heritage Ohio. It seems like a great opportunity, a great series that they put on for many months, and really excited for the opportunity to share what the City of Milwaukee has been doing with our housing stock. So I also wanted to thank all of our attendees. I know, at least here in Milwaukee, and it sounds like in Ohio, it's a nice sunny day. If you're in Ohio, maybe you've already had your lunch break and you were able to go outside, and you're back now in your working space. But in Milwaukee, we are currently during our lunch break. So I appreciate everybody staying inside and sharing in the work that Milwaukee's done over the last decade or so. So I won't go into my history because Joyce did a very nice job. Thank you, Joyce. Just a slide on my backgrounds. I'll just add to, I did work for a nonprofit housing organization prior to the City of Milwaukee. So a lot of the information that you see today, actually all of the information you see today will be specific to the work here at the City of Milwaukee. But similar work took place through different programs, through different funding in the past that I did work on at the nonprofit as well. So for today's presentation, just a quick agenda. We did the introduction already, so we'll talk about some facts about Milwaukee just to kind of position and orient everybody. We'll talk, the two primary focuses for today will be highlighting the programs that we're doing, but also the non-federal funding sources that we're able to use to successfully create and implement those programs. And then at the end, as Joyce mentioned, we can take some questions. So just to give kind of a geographic grounding for everybody. So Milwaukee, we are approximately an hour and a half by car north of Chicago, about 5 hours southeast of Minneapolis, and just over a 4-hour drive south or north. The drive would be south from Milwaukee to Indianapolis. And I did make sure that the graphic does encompass most of Ohio. So hopefully that'll give folks an idea, if you didn't know where Milwaukee was, where we are. This might be a little bit small to see, but just kind of zooming in a little bit, we have the city of Milwaukee is outlined in red, kind of right under the text. And then you see the surrounding metro area and our proximity to Chicago and Madison as well. And then zooming in further, just kind of want to keep this graphic in mind because I will refer back to the city boundary in a little while. Here you see the breakdown of our 15 common council districts in the city of Milwaukee. Just census population numbers. So the 2019 estimate for the city of Milwaukee was just over 590,000 folks. We do have, I have listed here the racial and ethnic breakdown of residents of the city of Milwaukee. And then I did pull some more specific data for housing and economics that are more related to our topic today. So as you can see, a median household income is just under 42,000. Median monthly owner cost with a mortgage is just under 1,300. The median gross rental is about 850. And then one thing I do want to draw your attention to is the owner occupancy rate. So based on the census, the city of Milwaukee has an owner occupancy rate of just over 41%. But kind of in our line of work, more single family, duplex, maybe even 3 and 4 unit, we like to look at kind of a different measurement of that and looking at 1 and 2 unit homes where you're likely going to have an owner occupant. We're at about 68% of our 1 and 2 unit homes as owner occupied. And then finally, the median value for owner occupied units is just over 122,000. A few other facts that are very related to the conversation today. Some things to know. So between about 2008 and 2013, the city of Milwaukee saw a reduction in owner occupied properties by approximately 12%. So much of the work that we've done since 2013 is looking to address owner occupancy rates. And then the racial and ethnic breakdown of home ownership in Milwaukee. Again, we see that at 41.1%, and then actually kind of broken down again by race and by ethnicity, the percent homeowners of those different folks, those different families. And then one other thing to mention, and this could be applicable to many other legacy type cities. We've had many studies done, and we've had many conclusions that come out similar, that the housing affordability issue in Milwaukee is as much of a jobs issue as it is a housing market issue. So our housing market, the cost to live is not extreme. It's fairly average, but the part of the major issue or part of the issue is actually the income side of the equation. So jobs and incomes are significantly behind. I did put a link, I think it is maybe a little hard to see, but that is to a report that was done by the Wisconsin Policy Forum detailing this specific issue back in 2018. And then kind of as a graphic to represent some of the data, the two maps on the left, the 2005 owner occupancy rates, the darker the blue is the higher the owner occupancy rate, and the darker the red is the lower the rate. And you can see then in 2019, the number of areas that were blue that have been either lightened or switched over to a light red, but also then the expansion of areas with a darker red, showing the lessening of owner occupancy throughout the city. And then the graphic on the right is actually, again, racial and ethnic breakdown. So we are a city that is fairly diverse for 3 or 4 races and ethnicities, but we are incredibly segregated. And this map really drives home that point. So the green dots are kind of the majority of the image that you see. Those are African American and Black families. The orange dots towards kind of the middle on the bottom, those are Hispanic and Latino families. Kind of a couple of very small zones of red throughout the green area Those are Asian American families, and then the blue dots are white families. And you can see, relating to the images to the left, the neighborhoods and the races that were really impacted by homeownership loss in the last 15 years. So considering all of that, really our primary housing goals that we've focused on over the last, again, 5 to 10 years, focusing on increasing homeownership while reducing racial disparities in that homeownership. So wanting to get more homeowners, but also wanting to reduce the discrepancies and the disparities in who owns in Milwaukee. Also preserve homeownership and the quality housing stock that we do have. So I do have a number of images later, and hopefully everyone would enjoy those photos and agree that, you know, our housing stock is high quality, and we are doing what we can to preserve it. And then third, promote high quality affordable housing. So not just getting houses repaired and back occupied if they were vacant, but also making sure that the quality is high and that those units are affordable. So then, kind of moving into one of the two major topics for today, looking at the funding sources that maybe are not used by many municipalities or even state level organizations. I think it's fair to assume that most communities do get funding from HUD for housing, and that could be directly to the municipality, that could be through the county, that could be through the state. So really the focus for the presentation today is where we've been creative in allocating and finding funds that are outside of those federal levels, federal financing. So again, not looking at HUD, not looking at low-income housing tax credits, and really focusing on what we're doing at the local level for funding. That funding, you'll see, will come with more flexibility. So we don't have as many regulations and stipulations on the funding. And also, I think it's important to note, you know, that is scalable. So some of the funding mechanisms that we'll look at today could be applicable for a very small community, very small municipality, medium size, or even a large city. So kind of keep in mind as we go through what could be scalable to the size of the city that you're in. So the three primary non-federal funding sources that I'll talk about, first is really pretty basic, actually. So it's the city annual capital budget allocation. So it's really a commitment from the mayor and from the Common Council to prioritize housing, to prioritize funding for housing. I often get calls from around the country. I probably get 5 or 6 calls a year, so maybe every few months, from different municipalities asking how we're funding our programs. And I can't remember too many local municipalities that have a line item or several line items in their annual budget for housing. So although not overly creative, certainly something that seems to be not being done at a large scale. The second then is an ability that we've been able to access through state legislation to get extensions on our tax incremental financing districts. So I'll go into that in a little bit further. And then the third opportunity is partnerships. So non-governmental, philanthropic, and lending institutions and agencies. So the first source, as I mentioned, is really that the general fund, the annual capital budget allocations. So a few things to keep in mind here. So approximately 2014, we really saw a decrease in federal NSP dollars, Neighborhood Stabilization Program dollars, through the Recovery Acts. So as a city, we decided, okay, we're seeing a reduction of funding from the federal level that was really focused around the stimulus. What are we going to do now? We can't just rely on those home dollars, those block grant dollars, and those LIHTC dollars. We need to take an action at the city level. So Mayor Barrett in 2014 developed what was called our Strong Neighborhoods Plan, which really had 4 arms: prevention, mitigation, revitalization, and renewal. And within those, we recognize that the city owns a lot of properties. So we need to maintain those properties. We recognize that there's a lot of demolition that has been decided that needs to be done. We also recognize that we'll have vacant lots to preserve and make sure are clean. But then on the other side, helping people stay in their homes, preventing foreclosures, preventing ongoing maintenance issues, and the revitalization side. So it could be new construction, it could be new implementation of other development opportunities taking place. So the commitment was for 3 to 4 years. We actually ended up in about a 5-year time frame for that funding. Just one thing I want to mention, with the Strong Neighborhoods Plan, we were seeing, we still are seeing, 100+ demolitions taking place every year, and then over time also a backlog of 300+ properties that the city needs to demolish based on condition, based on ongoing issues taking place at those properties. So that's one thing to keep in mind, but then a lot of the program was really focused around what's next, how do we look forward from that. So then in 2018, Mayor Barrett came out with the 10,000 Homes Initiative. So looking at kind of what we did under the Strong Neighborhoods Plan and saying what's next, we're not going to just, we're seeing the private market foreclosures, the bank foreclosures have really dissipated, have really slowed down. City tax foreclosures have kind of hit a peak, and we're starting to see drop as well. What do we want to focus on here? And really what we're kind of in stride in right now is supporting development of new affordable housing, taking resources to preserve or promote existing housing stock that we already have, and then support and prepare individuals for home ownership. Again, kind of thinking back to some of those primary goals that we've identified. So the next funding source that I'll mention, and again, the first one is certainly applicable at any scale. It's more about where are the priorities for the administration and where are the priorities for the Common Council or other elected officials. The second source, a number of years ago, I think probably around 10 years ago now, was the idea was kind of this concept of taking, we use TIF financing or tax incremental financing to do affordable housing, to do housing improvements, but many of the TIFs are not specific or not focused on housing. So there was a major lobbying effort done at the state level from support from both sides of the aisle and kind of understanding the importance of continued improvement and investment in housing. So through that lobbying effort, the state of Wisconsin did update its statutes around tax incremental financing and created an opportunity for a 1-year extension that could be granted that's specific to housing. So some of that information is below. I did put the state statute there. If anybody is really excited to read those, feel free. But kind of the basics to boil it down, the TIF affordable housing extension, a couple of components. One, we're not going back to the Joint Review Board with this request. This is simply an enabling resolution that's passed at the local municipal level. So let's say the TID or the TIF or the TID, if it's a district, is set to expire this year or next year. We would then go in front of our Common Council and say, we're looking to extend it for 1 year to take that increment for 1 more year and invest in affordable housing. Those funds are appropriated through the annual budget process. So we might see a program or a line item in the budget, but the money coming into that program is not tax base, is not property taxes necessarily. It's that 1 year increment that is plugged in to that budget line that then will be the direct funding source for that program or those series of programs. As I mentioned, it's a 1-year extension on the final increment. And I don't want to go too much into this because it gets a little bit wonky and certainly not overly exciting to hear about unless you're really excited about it. I'd be happy to take emails and have phone conversations at some point in the future if you want to know more. We are actually seeing some interest in adding a year or two onto that extension. So as it stands right now, We have a 1-year extension, but there is interest at different levels of making that a 2 or a 3-year extension. So really opening up the opportunity to use that increment for housing. And then the final little bit of information is at least 75% of the funds from that final increment need to benefit affordable housing, and it's citywide. So it's not just in that TID, it's not just in that tax incremental district, or it's not within a few blocks of it. It is citywide. So an excellent opportunity to take what could have been a TID that did great, maybe in the downtown or in an area that's really experienced major development, and take that increment and make sure that that you have really high quality affordable housing throughout the city. And the other 25% of it, making the full 100% of that final increment, needs to still go to housing, but it's really, it doesn't need to be limited to affordable housing. It needs to go to improve the city's housing stock. So an incredibly powerful tool. The last few years, we've seen a few $100,000 through TIDs that are closing out. Exciting news for this year. One of our largest, if not our largest TIDs is closing, and we're actually able to get $6.5 million of the final increment to go to fund much of what I'm going to talk about, but also new opportunities for other programs. And then finally, the idea of partnerships. So we were able to work with a few different loan mortgage servicers that were identified at the national level as having kind of negative practices that did impact Milwaukee neighborhoods during the housing crisis, 2008 through 2013, and certainly in that space prior and in that space post. So we were able to get, although not a lot, it's still worth noting that we were able to get $300,000 from those servicers to put into our programs. And I think the important point there is that we were being creative, we were looking at what the problems were, but also there was a willingness on those servicers to provide some funds. The next is a regional lender. So in a few slides, I'll detail a program, but we were able to essentially take a program that we're funding by city dollars, by the city budget dollars, and by the TIF extension dollars, a revolving loan funds. And on the back end, we were able to sell a segment or smaller portfolio of that program to this regional lender. They paid us $1.1 million for it. And essentially now those payments go to that lender. We still retain the servicing on those loans, which is incredibly important kind of touch point for the city and for our residents. But it did have a large injection into that program. And it was a great opportunity. That regional lender is able to get CRA credits. And they're able to lend more kind of evenly throughout the community, as well as other grant opportunities that the regional lender was able to come to us with for new construction. So I won't talk about that today, but just to mention that that was part of our partnership with that lender. And then I want to mention the philanthropic community. We do have a number of philanthropic organizations that focus on community development and housing, and we are at all different points in time working with numerous philanthropic organizations on our housing work, on providing funding opportunities and kind of targeting our housing stock and our lower income families for improvements. One other thing I do want to mention, and I won't go too far into this because we haven't done it, but it's an idea that I want to throw out there. We have noticed that over time, we do get a lot of applicants for our Strong Homes Loan Program that have a threat of insurance cancellation. And we have been documenting who those insurance companies are. And at some point, we may consider going to those insurance companies and saying, look, it's in everybody's best interest that a property is maintained. It's certainly in the insurance company's interest, if they're not looking for having claims on those properties in the future, to maybe help provide some funding up front for our programs, because once we put funds into a house, that benefits the insurance company as well. So it's an opportunity that we've been considering and we've been tracking internally over the last few years. And I do want to mention on this last one, on the partnership side, again, this is very scalable, right? Everybody has mortgage lenders in their community, loan servicers in their community, regional lenders that are looking to invest, looking to meet CRA requirements, looking to really engage with community development work. And I think many even smaller cities have philanthropic organizations, and certainly everybody has insurance companies. So a couple things to know about our process and our context. So the tool, and I recognize that this is not common for everybody. So I do want to say that although this is unique to Milwaukee or maybe a few cities, it doesn't mean that all of our programs would be impacted differently. So the first two programs I'll talk about, it is important that the city takes ownership of the property for us to be able to succeed in that. So again, I understand that this might not be fully applicable, but it's certainly something to think about. So property tax foreclosures with the city of Milwaukee actually takes ownership of the properties through an in rem process. So if someone doesn't pay their property taxes for 3 years, we don't go through a sheriff's sale. There's no auction. The city, I don't say simply because it is a process, but the city actually takes direct ownership of those properties. A few things to note: when the city takes ownership, it actually wipes out all liens, and that property is, the title is free and clear. So that provides some great opportunities for future buyers and for us to be able to then dispose of those properties through many different disposition strategies. And second, which is also somewhat unique, I think, to Milwaukee, but certainly something other municipalities could consider, is our city real estate team is located in the same department as our housing and neighborhood development team, which is the team I'm on, and also our city planning team. And it's important to recognize that having that all under one roof, all in one department, is much easier to coordinate those assets and the disposition of those assets into the greater kind of planning idea, the planning documents, master plans, but also what investments can be made in those houses and how is that impacting the neighborhoods. A couple additional benefits. The city really has the ability to control home ownership terms. So once we take a property, we're able to say that only an owner occupant can buy this property going forward. Or we can say maybe for a term, or we're able to say, no, this is for an investor. But we have that ability, and it actually is a very strong ability and very important in our work. Second is the ability to determine development opportunities. So if Habitat for Humanity or another housing agency is looking for properties to rehab or vacant lots, we're able to help package those scattered site deals, or it could be a live tech scattered site deal or other development opportunities. We do have a program that we're operating right now where we have small and minority-owned or minority-led development companies that are really startups for the most part, and we're able to then get opportunities to those fledgling companies to really start their real estate business, their development business. So we're able to make those decisions. And then last, we're able to make initial investments prior to sale. So that is key for our first program that I'll talk about. I did want to just bring everybody back. I know that was a lot of text, but I do want to bring everybody back to our primary housing goals, which will then lead into the program. So again, increasing home ownership while reducing racial disparities in home ownership, preserving home ownership and quality housing stock, and then promoting high quality affordable housing. Again, those will be underlying components of the programs that I talk about. So some of the examples, and these are some of our bigger programs, so that's why they're on here. We do have other programs as well. And these are examples of our major housing programs that are not federally funded. So we have talked about funding, we've talked about our goals, and then here's the actual program and implementation part. A few things to keep in mind. Most of the programs that we develop, we have identified as being gaps in the market. So we're not creating programs that other people are already doing. We're not creating programs to draw funds away from banks or local lenders. We're creating programs where we see there's a gap in the market, there's a need in the market, and we're trying to fill that need or that gap. There can be some overlap in some programs, but really the goal is to fill the gap and to fill the need in the market. And in cases where we do overlap, we do allow some programs to fund multiple, a project could have multiple funding sources as well. The two programs that are kind of grayed, there's one under homeownership and the one under affordable rental. I'm not going to talk about those programs too much today, other than the tenant transition to ownership program, or T3OP, is an opportunity. As I mentioned, when the city takes a property through tax foreclosure, we do have occupants sometimes in those properties, and we are able to, as long as they're not the previous owner, if they're interested, we can get them into homeownership counseling, and then we can actually fix the house and help them kind of get really ready for homeownership by selling them that property for $1 that they already live in. And what that does, there's some major cost savings in that model. We don't have board up costs, we don't have break-in costs, we don't have police calls and fire calls to a vacant property, right? It's already occupied. We don't have a real estate, we don't have a property on the market with a real estate agent. So it's a very efficient program, because we're not trying to sell someone on the house or on the neighborhood, because they already live there, they're already the tenant. And then on the affordable rental side, we have modeled our rental rehabilitation program after our federal home program. But essentially, the opportunity is there for an investor to purchase a 1 to 4 unit property from the city, and as a mechanism to encourage or enhance that, provide matching funds per unit for rehab. And there we do require, it's a 5-year period of affordability where that owner needs to commit to rent caps, but also income limits for the tenants in that property for those 5 years. The programs now that I am going to touch on are the 4 that are bold, and we kind of go from kind of the most cost intensive and most visually recognizable kind of to the least. And a couple of things to keep in mind: these first 2 programs, the HIP program and our HBA program, do rely on the city owning the property up front. Now they can look different if that's not the case, but I just wanted to mention that. And then again, keep in mind scalability. So some of these programs are pretty intensive, but also at the same time, some of them could be done at kind of any scale of the community. So the first program I mentioned I'm going to talk about is our Housing Infrastructure Preservation Program, or our HIP program. Here's just some of the program basics. The property is already owned by the city. It's an in rem tax foreclosed property. The city is really focusing on investing in the exterior of the property, kind of the facade and kind of the enclosure, to make sure that water infiltration is not taking place and damaging the inside any further on these properties. We are doing that work to historic standards. On the backside, we do have an owner occupant that's going to be buying the property and doing the interior investment. So we're focused on the exterior while we own it. We'll then sell it, and that buyer has to do the interior work. And a major component here is that it's a 5-year owner occupancy restriction. A couple of program rationale. So really, we're saying that the cost to rehab both the interior and the exterior of a historic house far exceeds likely the appraisal valuation, making lender financing nearly impossible. So we're really taking that exterior costs, and we're kind of eating those costs in many cases, to then make the interior investment essentially make sense for a lender based on the valuation after rehab. And here I think it's fair to say that many of the properties would not sell if we didn't do this, based on that issue of financing becoming long-term issues, potentially and most likely demolition candidates based on the years of exposure to elements, but after we've also spent significant money on holding costs. The program funding, so I'll list on these programs, 1, 2, or 3, the 3 funding sources that I talked about. So the first one was the city annual budget. A couple statistics on the program. It's been in operation since 2011. We've done just under 60 houses, and we've sold 46 of those. So we have 13 that are either under construction or on the market. Our total HIP investment has been about $4.3 million, which averages about $73,000 per house. And we're selling those houses for about $12,000. So right there, you start to think, well, how does that financially make sense? Key things to keep in mind here is benefits. And on the next slide, I'll show you some of the financial breakdown. Really what the benefits are: we're keeping historically significant houses intact, and we're reducing the demolition. The other key benefit is home ownership again. So I don't want to get too wonky on the numbers, but this kind of just boils it down to very basics. There's a lot more involved in this calculation, but essentially you could argue, and I would argue that, as I mentioned on the last slide, the average HIP property gets about $73,000 of investment. The average sales price is 12, so we're recouping 12,000 on the sale. So your average city subsidy is about 61,000. We're not demoing the property. We're keeping out of the demolition line. And arguably, I think most of the properties, because they couldn't get financing to do everything, could very well be demolished over at some point in time. So I think it's fair to assume that we're saving demo costs. So our average net city investment is about $48,000 per property. Quick calculation at the bottom. On a $200,000 property, right? So the city's putting in 73, and I think it's fair to say that the future buyer might put in 100 or so thousand for interior updates, etc. The city's benefit on that property for taxes would be approximately $3,600 a year. So that's not including county, that's not including the school system, that's not including the technical college and everyone else. That's simply what's coming back to the city. So you could argue that on a $48,000 investment, getting your return at $3,600 a year, we would see a 13-year payback. We would get that $48,000 back over 13 years. And what do we get for that? We get a historic house that's intact. We don't get a vacant lot, and we get an owner occupant. A couple examples of houses that we've done in this program, and I'll just touch on those numbers very briefly. This house is from the mid 1800s, one of the oldest houses in the city, which was crazy that it came into city ownership. Certainly you could feel the excitement around staff to have the opportunity to get this back into really great shape and back into private ownership. So here you see the HIP program put in about $95,000. We did sell this one for $40,000, and again, kind of backing out that avoided demolition cost, we really saw about a $42,000 all in for the city. Based on the value and based on the investment that the owner's putting in, they put in over $240,000 on the interior. We'll see this paid back in about 10 years. So my example before was about a 13-year average. This one I would expect to see in about a 10-year. And we really gauge the purchase price off of what makes sense for the market. So knowing what the investment is, knowing what the potential outcome and final valuation is, will help us then back into what we list that property at. Another example, kind of on the other extreme, I would say, this property we invested, it's a big, gorgeous Milwaukee duplex. We consider it a 3-3, which would be 3 bedrooms on the lower flat, 3 bedrooms in the upper flat. Fantastic house, just a large property. We also invested about $90,000 here. The sales price though, and again, based on the market, based on many other factors, we were just under $16,000. And the owner actually was a contractor. So the investment was about $60,000 on the interior, but recognizing that there was a lot of cost savings for him because he did a lot of the work himself. So here, $90,000, and you back out the purchase price of about $16,000. The demo savings of $13,000, we saw about a $61,000 investment from the city's HIP program, or from the city side. But because there isn't as much value here, and because again, kind of the geography, we may see this paid back in 30 plus years, just based on the lower valuation and the lower assessment. And then the last example I'll give for this program is this property. Again, we invested about $70,000, so about our average. We sold it for $10,500, so about our average. And the post-sale, the owner investment was over $175,000. Beautiful house, but kind of running those numbers again, I won't walk you through every detail. I think we'll probably get paid back in about 12 years. So really looking at this program, could you make an argument that, well, the city is getting paid back because it went from a tax foreclosed property that wasn't generating any tax base. We took it off of what could be almost in every scenario the demolition list, which would create no tax base in the future for the city unless a house is built there. So we save houses that are significant in terms of historic value. We're creating homeownership, and we are seeing that be paid back, approximately a 13-year time frame. The next program I'll move to, and I'll move a little bit quicker because I think we want to save about 10 minutes or so at the end for questions. So our homebuyer assistance program, This program looks a little different. We actually have the property, the city owns the property, and we're selling it to an owner occupant that's going to be doing both interior and exterior improvements on the property. But here we do provide up to $20,000 in the form of a forgivable loan to assist with the rehab work. We do have a 5-year owner occupancy restriction, similar to the HIP program. But here, because the work is really being done after by the owner, we do have in-house staff that understand construction and architecture in the process. So they help create the scope of work, they help find contractors, and they help on the payment side on the back end. So incredibly valuable resource for a buyer at no cost to them. So we're not charging for that technical assistance. Some of the rationale, again, rehabbing both interior and exterior of a tax foreclosed house may exceed the valuation, making it very difficult for lenders to fund. But again, these aren't necessarily historic houses, so oftentimes we do see lenders get involved directly, and people are not accessing this program. But the scenario, again, kind of plays out where the property might not get demolished, but it would likely not go to an owner occupant based on those upfront purchase and rehab costs. So here we are providing an opportunity to keep more housing in homeownership. The funding is, again, the city budget, but this is a program where we are accessing the TIF extension funds. Some basic numbers, and I won't even go step by step here, but 2 things to look at. The city's investment is about 1.2 million so far since 2015. The non-government leverage is over 3 times that. And really what that is that we worked very hard with our local lending community to create a product, the HVA product, to pair with their purchase rehab products. And in cases where they didn't have a purchase rehab product, they created a product to pair with our program. So I want to just highlight that without this program, many of the lenders that are doing purchase rehab would not do it because they count on our staff, our technical staff, to make sure the work is done correctly and identified correctly. So here you can see, working with our local lending community, we've actually seen an increase in loan products from those partners to make sure that this type of work can happen. And affordable homeownership, so I'll touch on a couple of the numbers, and then we're, again, retaining block integrity by avoiding demolitions. Couple numbers on, I'm going to go through these again a little bit quicker, but here I really am focusing on affordable homeownership. So this project, you could say that the rule of thumb is that people shouldn't be paying more than 30% for housing costs, right? So that's mortgage, insurance, taxes, utilities. So on here, I specifically outline the person who purchased this house, the family who bought the house, had about a $900 a month housing cost, which based on their income was 28%. So in that ballpark, their new housing costs, because of the ability to get low interest financing, because of their ability to access our $20,000 forgivable loan, they actually have a housing cost of only $450 a month to be an owner occupant, and their housing ratio is 15%. I do want to mention, and I want to give a shout out to my wife for helping me out with the presentation. The house that we're looking at, she mentioned her background is in architecture. She mentioned that it looks like we put vinyl siding on a brick house. So I would just call attention to the before picture on the left. It's actually an asbestos shingle. So we did not put siding on a brick house, which I know many people on this call would be very disappointed in, myself included. Couple other examples. So the house on the top, $700 a month payment prior, housing ratio over that 30% that we like to hit. After the fact, this family is using this house as a single family, even though it's a duplex, and they're seeing their housing costs of $400 a month, pushing their housing ratio way under the 30% threshold. The bottom house, again, $700 a month or so. Previous ratio was almost 40%, and their new housing cost is under $400 a month and a housing cost ratio of 22%. The example on the top is actually pretty unique. This is the duplex. So this buyer is getting income from that other unit. So you see a previous housing cost that was $650 a month, and the ratio was over 40%, which is high. Their new housing cost is $250 a month, and their new ratio is 11%. So even if they have a vacancy in that unit, their housing costs are less than what they would have been if they continued in their situation. And it's pretty clear in Milwaukee that we have low vacancy rates for affordable housing. So it's very likely that that other unit will be rented at least 11 months of the year if you're trying to calculate kind of that long-term ratio. And then on the bottom image, the family, their housing cost was $950 a month, again over the 30% that we like to see. This new opportunity, Homeownership, they're paying just over $600 a month for housing costs, pushing them down to 15% housing ratio. So very great opportunities, owner occupancy, but also affordable ownership. The last program that I'm going to go into in any detail is our Strong Homes Loan Program. And this has been kind of our bread and butter for 6-7 years now. This is not a program where the city owns the house. So this is a current owner occupant who needs some repairs done. So it's a low interest loan to complete exterior and interior emergency and essential repairs. We do provide up to $20,000 in the form of a payback loan. So it becomes a revolving loan essentially. But if that owner occupant stays there for 10 years, we do actually forgive 25% of that. So the technicality and the functionality of it, we actually create two loans. One is for 75%, which is the payback, and one is for 25%, which is forgiven after those 10 years. And again, one of the major selling points is that we have our technical staff that is able to assist with scope development, as well as contractor selection and payments on the back end. A couple things to keep in mind. We worked with the lending community in Milwaukee to make sure that this program doesn't draw away from their work, from their loans. So if we do see someone that applies and we say, it looks like you could probably get a loan from a bank, we're going to ask them to attempt to do that first before going through our program. It is really a program of last resort. But a lot of times we're seeing people who are underwater and in many kind of financial circumstances that we're comfortable lending to, but a bank might not. And really here we're saying we've created a program that I think it's fair to say that we're trying to prove the market to the lending community and say, look, we can do this. Here are our numbers. Here are our default rates, and these are the folks that we're lending to, which are generally outside of kind of the level of comfort for many lenders. And look, you should do this. You should take on this program, and we shouldn't be doing it anymore. But in the current form, it is a program that we operate. But this is the program that we did select I think about 90 loans, and we sold that portfolio to a local lender and then reinvested that $1.1 million into this program. Again, we're still maintaining the servicing on it and the relationships around it, but those payments are now going to that local lender. Just a couple things rationale. So again, a lot of homeowners found themselves underwater based on the market crash through no fault of their own. Nothing they did wrong caused them to be underwater. But if you're underwater, you can't borrow money to repair your house from a lender. So that's where we come in. Again, the funding for the program is the city tax, the city annual budget, the TIF extensions, those partner agencies that I mentioned, but also this is a revolving loan fund. So we do have program income coming in from those loan payments. A couple other numbers that I won't go into just based on time, but interesting numbers to take a look at. We are closing in on our 500th deal for this program, so very impactful, nearly $7 million. And you can see the breakdown of income and household size and average age of the property and the average loan size here. The benefits are homeownership retention and housing maintenance, so not just creating new homeownership, but maintaining it, and reducing the tax foreclosures due to unpaid code violations that can accumulate on a property tax bill. Just some basic information, just to give you a snapshot of who our borrowers are. And here you don't see major work done because these are truly emergency and essential repairs. Couple examples of an owner's age, the household size, area median income, the loan terms. So generally 0 and 3% interest will go anywhere from 3 to 15 years, making sure that that payment is affordable. In these next two examples, these are households that qualify for our deferred loan payment. So still 25% can be forgiven after 10 years, but with a deferred payment, if you're low income, if you're elderly, if you're disabled, we do offer the opportunity that you're not making a monthly payment, but that entire lump sum is due when you sell the house. So based on the proceeds from the sale, that's when we see that payment happen back to us. And you can see the repairs also. So roof, porches, painting, siding, electrical, plumbing type work. So the last program I'll touch on, and I won't go into any more detail beyond this slide, is something that's unique, and it's not something that that we get too much into, but it is becoming pretty important in our tool belt, if you will, is our neighborhood improvement district, our NIDs. So similar, if you're familiar with a business improvement district or a BID, these are boundaries that are decided on by the local residents. It's voted on, just like a bid. And if there's enough votes, they will have a NID implemented where property owners are self-assessing. So usually you're seeing about a $50 or a $100 a year assessment, self-assessment, that then gets collected. And then the NID board or the administrator gets to decide where that money is going. That's decided up front. So most of the programs that we see are, some are safety, some are lighting, some are community engagement, but for the most part, they are repair programs between anywhere from a few thousand up to $15,000, generally grants. And those are for essential and emergency type repairs, and in some cases, energy efficiency, and maybe some like plumbing and electrical type updates as well. So it's unique enough that I wanted to bring it up because it could very well be something that other communities could look at. There's no funding source for it, but essentially the funding is coming from those self-assessments from the residents in the area, similar to a bid, where that money then is going directly back into that area. So in summary, the city of Milwaukee has allocated over $30 million, and it's significantly more than that, but that was the number I wanted to publish. Of non-federal funds for housing rehabilitation initiatives and programs since 2014, again, when we saw a drop off of the NSP, the federal NSP dollars. Some major components to keep in mind. So the city general fund, that annual budget, it's incredibly important for the administration, the mayor, and the common council to make sure that housing is a priority. And that is potentially then when you see those budget line items come in to the annual budget. On the TIF side, on the tax incremental financing extensions, really that's a change at the state level. It's a legislative change with lobbying efforts from local municipalities to have the opportunity to extend that TIF and use that increment for affordable housing citywide. And then the partnership side, again, this could be for any community of any size, looking at who's doing development work, looking at who's doing other investment, but then also looking and finding those partners with mutual interests. And the mutual interest could be community development opportunities. It could be CRA regulations and opportunities, or in some cases, maybe it's insurance companies or philanthropic organizations. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. And if you do drop off, thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much, Larry. Reminder for those people wanting the AIA credits, that link is in the chat box, as well as the book giveaway for Evicted is in the chat box. We have a couple of questions that have already come in. The first one from Jonathan: are the first programs mentioned, HIP, etc., simply an exterior envelope repair only program and leaving the interior for the purchaser to finish? Interesting strategy.
Yeah, so specific to the HIP program, the city is making the investment on the exterior for two reasons. One, that is where the historic nature comes in. So we recognize that that's going to be generally more expensive costs. But the second piece is really to make sure that enclosure, that it's watertight, right? So that property could still sit for a few years, but with that investment, we want to make sure that water's not getting in the property and nothing's being damaged as it's sitting on the market. So specific to the HIP program, yes, we are doing just exterior repairs to meet those historic standards, and then leaving the interior repairs, which are likely a little bit cheaper and a little bit easier to do with bank financing.
Okay, the next question, Deanna asks, how does the city track the reduction of racial disparities in homeownership through their programs?
That's a great question. So we've certainly, that is in our newest efforts over the last few years, based on our recognition of what's taken place and based on many studies that have come out, that is certainly something that is at the forefront of our newest programs. Based on, as I mentioned, we had a TIF that is closing this year, so we're going to have $6.5 million to implement many of our programs. So in doing so, we're looking at how we can implement and methods to implement that really target certain geographies, certain demographics, and assist with kind of bridging that gap and tightening the disparities. Over time, in general, our programs that we offer, we do track race and we do track income and a number of other demographic characteristics. And the vast majority of folks that go through our programs are minority families. 70–75% of our loan clients or our buyers that go through the programs that I mentioned today are identified as minority families.
Okay, thank you. The next question. Some have said such low sales prices do not benefit real estate values in the neighborhood. What are your comments?
Yeah, that's an incredibly difficult balance. So, we do encourage appraisers and other folks to not look at the foreclosure cost, the foreclosure sales prices, but we recognize that that is part of the market. That is part of what's going on. So, we have to look at it two ways. One, we don't want to depress the market because there is a foreclosure, but we also have to be realistic in saying that generally there's not going to be a buyer or a lender that's interested in paying full price knowing that there is tens of thousands of dollars of work remaining. So we have to sell the properties at such a reduced amount to financially make sense for a lender to come in and say, I'm willing to lend you this money to buy this house, knowing that there's 10, 20, 30, 50, $100,000 of repairs that are needed. So I think you could argue that the sales price could depress the market, but that sales price, it needs to be considered with the investment that comes with it, which should bring that property to essentially what the market can bear. But it's a very, very good point, and certainly something that we wrestle with.
Okay, please write your questions in. We have one last question that referred to at the very beginning, I think, or the HIP program at the beginning. Federal liens too, the property is really completely free and clear, was the question.
Yeah, all liens, absolutely. All liens drop off. It doesn't mean that that orders won't come back if work isn't done. It doesn't mean that, if there's a lead issue in that property, that those orders won't reappear at some point. But yes, that the property is free and clear, the title is free and clear, and that is what allows us to sell a lot of the properties that we have, right? Because it's if you were to go to someone and say, we're going to sell this property, but you have to pay all these liens or all these back taxes or all these water bills, we just wouldn't be able to sell the hundreds of properties we do every year with those liens in place. So yes, it does clear title.
Okay, don't have any other questions. Well, I'll give my parting comments. We'll see if anyone else puts a question in. I'd like to thank everyone for attending the webinar today, and particularly thank Larry so much. We saw some Milwaukee programs come across on the internet, and we thought, oh, they are doing a lot to save historic buildings. So we really appreciate you doing that. The AIA HSW credits, please fill out the form in the chat box. You can also email me at jbarrett@heritageohio.org and I will send you the form. Again, if you're interested in reading the book Evicted, that contest is in the chat box. We'll let you know this afternoon who the winner is of the book. Our next webinar will be on March 24th on PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, which is another funding alternative that you can take advantage of in rehabilitating. You can find our upcoming events on our calendar at heritageohio.org. And we don't have any other questions that have come in. So I guess we'll call it a day. Thank you so much, Larry.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks everybody. And my contact information is on that last slide. If anybody does have follow-up thoughts or questions, I'd be happy to connect with you.
Okay, thank you so much. And we'll see what comes of it. Like, they weren't very questiony, I
No,
guess.
that's okay. I think the timing seemed to be good. We have 1 o'clock, so that was perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you so much,
All right.
Larry.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.
Mhm.
Bye.
Bye.